tonight. So I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Judy Kesser is a retired teacher, and she has a passion for monarch butterflies. We'll explain their life cycle and the importance of habitat, providing habitat to the monarchs. She's visited the monarch sanctuary in Mexico. It should be a fantastic, interesting presentation tonight. So let's welcome Judy.
Let's try and get those lights in the back. See if those just keep turning until they soar. Keep going. Need to get these off. Try to get these. They got two-way switches and they're different every time. That's why I never know which ones to turn. Let me see if we got these front.
Yes. Okay, we're good to go. Before I get into my program, I just wanted to tell you what is available on that table over there on the side that you can take with you. There is a brochure on creating a monarch way station, and I'll be talking about that in my presentation tonight. This is materials for Monarch Watch out of the University of Kansas, Chip Taylor. And the other brochure, the orange one, is the ones that the wild ones made up in conjunction with Monarch Joint Venture last year, and has wonderful information on what to plant. It has all the reasons why we want to plant native plants, and then on the back of it, it has a list of the milkweeds that are suitable for this area of the country, and it has a list of nectar plants that you could plant and when they bloom, early summer, midsummer, and late summer, because pollinators and the monarchs and all the other butterflies eat all summer long. So that's a good resource.
Judy, ask if they can hear okay. Ask if we need to adjust the volume.
Okay, how is the volume in the back?
Good.
Good. Okay, good. All right, the other two are bookmarks. There's one from Wild Ones, and from their for Monarch campaign, and the other one's from Monarch Watch. And I attached milkweed packets to both of them. So take one or the other, or both. They're both common milkweed seeds. And if you want to plant them this year, probably nothing will happen because they have to stratify. So you might want to wait till the fall and put them in the ground there in a sunny place, cover them up, let them go through the winter, and get that cold, moist, freezing and thawing that nature does for them. But it's a motivational thing. Save something to take home and do something with. Okay, a little bit about how I got started in this. As I was introduced, she mentioned that I was a retired teacher, and the teacher never dies. So once I retired and I got interested in native plants and joined the wild ones and started revamping my yard with many native plants, got rid of the grass, put the native plants in its place, and that's when the monarchs came with the milkweed. And then I got interested in raising them. In 2005, I started raising monarchs, and the following year I started tagging them with the Monarch Watch program, and have been doing that ever since. Well, you get fascinated with it, and you start taking pictures, and then it turns into a PowerPoint, and then I started going to school groups and talking, and then it got to adult groups, so I talked to senior groups, Audubon groups, master gardeners, anybody who will listen. So, here we go. Every individual monarch has a cycle in its life. Egg to caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly. And the monarch species as a whole also has a sequence to it, or a cycle, which stretches all the way from Canada down to Mexico for the winter. And west of the Rockies, they will migrate to the coast for the winter. The Rocky Mountains separates the two populations. There is some mixing. Some of the West Coast ones will migrate to Mexico. And there is a population that goes down to Florida and goes back up. Well, the majority of them go right down to Mexico. And this is where I started. Back in 2005, one of the small gardens that I had put in had milkweed. There's a little patch of common milkweed here. And that's where I got started. The reason I put this picture in is because you can see on the back of my house I have a porch. It's a 3-season room. So I raise the monarchs out there. They're subject to the temperature, high and low, but they're protected from predators and bad weather. Well, that little patch of milkweed has spread all over the yard. So I have common milkweed in many spots. And in the wet areas, in my swale garden and my rain garden, I have the swamp milkweed. And in the dry, sunny areas, I put in the butterfly weed. So about the middle of May is when the monarchs get up here, middle to end of May. And this year they're about 2 weeks late leaving Mexico. So might not see them till around Memorial Day. We'll see. But I look on the underside of the leaves, and usually you'll find 1 egg per leaf, but sometimes more. And over her lifespan, about a couple of weeks, that monarch can lay 400 plus eggs. But not too many survive. Some say less than 4%, others put it down as like 1 to 2%. So a lot of eggs, not all make it. When I'm looking at the plant, I also can see clues. I'll see these little tiny holes that tell me that that egg hatched already and the monarch is chewing on the leaf. And if you turn the leaf over, this is what you see. That little tiny caterpillar has chewed a little island for itself. That sticky white sap can glue its jaws shut. So it makes that little island so it can chew on the leaf. At this point, I bring in the leaves, cut off the part where the egg is, put them on a tray with wet paper towels so they don't dry out before the egg hatches. In a couple of days, the egg turns black on top, and you know that egg, that little caterpillar is ready to come out. Comes out of its eggshell, and it is very, very tiny at this point. Sometimes they're really hard to see. It's smaller than the lead in the lead pencil. But thanks to my friend Holly, who I met on Facebook, she has some wonderful monarch pictures. You can see those little legs. He's going to be moving all over the place. First thing he does is eat the eggshell, which is very nutritious for him. And then he starts on the leaf. But as soon as they've hatched, I have to put them in containers. I use the aquariums with the screen tops. And I have about 8 of these going at a time usually. And I have to separate the tiny ones from the medium size from the big ones. Because they do cannibalize each other and walk all over the little ones and so on. Because their eyesight isn't very good, they use their antenna or their filaments to get around their environment. Short ones on the back, long ones are on the front. They breathe through little tiny holes in their body called spiracles. And in this picture you can see the holes on the black stripes. I've never seen it with the naked eye. They're very hard to pick out. But I like this picture because you can see their feet. They have those little suction cups on the bottom of their feet, like it helps them stick onto the surfaces they're crawling on. For the next 2 weeks, these little guys have nothing to eat. And all they will eat is milkweed. They will not eat any other plant. And in that milky sap are the protective toxins. Those cardioglycosides will protect the caterpillar, and then the butterfly, when he becomes an adult, protects them also there. Because there are a lot of critters on a lot of predators ready to eat the caterpillars and the butterflies. while they're very tiny, crawling around on the milkweed plant, spiders, wasps, anything that's crawling around there will eat the eggs and the tiny caterpillars. They eat the whole leaf, just leaving that stem behind. What goes in has to come out. And caterpillar poop is called frass. So with many caterpillars in the aquarium, there's lots of housekeeping work to be done. All the black spots you see are caterpillar poop. So twice a day I take everything out of each aquarium, take out what's left of the leaves, take out the paper towels, and empty out the frass, and put in clean towels and fresh leaves. The fresh leaves I find, I don't have enough milkweed in my yard to use for food all summer long. So I do get on my bike, go on bike trails, and a couple fields that I know about, and we'll cut down milkweed there for food. Then I bring it home, wash the leaves, put them in a Ziploc bag, and put them in the fridge. And they last for a couple weeks, just like they would clean lettuce for eating. Caterpillar's skin doesn't stretch the way ours does when he grows, so he will shed or molt his skin several times while he's growing up. And this one has just crawled out of his skin. There's his headpiece, that's the last part to come off. And his antennae are kind of curled up by his body. It's not quite finished. This process takes several hours, and during that time they are very vulnerable. You don't want to move them or disturb them in any way. Every time they shed their skin, it's called an instar. And you can see there's a first, second, third, fourth, fifth instar. And when this guy sheds his skin, underneath will be the chrysalis. This is what I find amazing, among many things about the monarchs, but this little guy here, just born, 2 weeks later, he's going to look like this. And it's like going to be like 2,800 times his birth size, which is equivalent to a human baby becoming the size of a school bus. These guys do it in 2 weeks. That's about how big they look when they're ready to make their chrysalis. Whenever they're crawling around, they are spinning silk with their mouth. And you can see it reflected on the glass there. It acts as a safety line. If they are on a plant and get knocked off or the wind blows them off, they can crawl back up on that thread, that silk thread. If they were out in the wild, they would go crawl to a place on a nearby plant and make their chrysalis on another plant. You rarely see them make their chrysalis on a milk plant. They'll go somewhere else. So this guy has found the spot, and what they do is spin a silk mat with their mouth, and then they turn around and attach their rear end to it. That's his head, that's his rear end. Then they hang down in the shape of a J for about 24 hours. And this one is about to make his chrysalis, because you can tell that the colors are not real sharp anymore. They look kind of muddy. His tentacles are very raggedy looking, and so he's about to shed his skin for the last time. And when he does that, the skin splits at the top, and he pushes that skin upward through a series of contractions, pushes it up to the top, and shakes it off. And what you're seeing here are two chrysalids that are two caterpillars that made their chrysalis right together, right next to each other. So when one made the chrysalis, I started taking pictures of the other one. And it only takes a couple minutes. There they are, back to back again. several hours for that soft, squishy chrysalis to harden, and it changes color from a yellowish green to that kind of turquoise color, bluish green. Chrysalis will stay in the chrysalis for about 2 weeks, and all of these stages are weather dependent. The hotter the weather, the faster they progress. If it's a cool summer, cool weather, it slows them way down. So all these times are approximate. This is what the inside of the screen top on an aquarium might look at any day. You have caterpillars who just crawled up there, caterpillars in the jay, fresh chrysalids, and the dark ones, where you can start seeing the orange of their wings coming through. You know that those will be eclosing or hatching into butterflies the next day. So the night before, I always know if I'll have 10 butterflies or 20 or 2, because they show you what's going on. And there's an empty chrysalid or 2 there. When they're ready to eclose, that chrysalis will split. Butterflies, there you can see it's just starting to open. Butterfly's head is here, you can see where the wings are. And when he comes out, he's going to grab a hold of that very slippery chrysalis. And his body kind of somersaults out. And he's trying to grab hold. And you will see his proboscis. I want you to look for that one. The next slide is a video. And the proboscis is what they eat with that straw-like appendage under their head. And when they're coming out, that he will flip out those 2 strands of the proboscis. Comes out in 2 separate strands. And in the next few minutes to an hour or so, he has to zip those 2 strands together in order for that proboscis to be useful. If he's unable to do that, he'll never be able to eat. And when the butterfly turns sideways, when he comes out of the chrysalis, you'll see him flipping that out a couple times. The wings at this point are very soft and wet. They feel like wet Kleenex. And if they fall at this point down to the bottom of the aquarium, I can lift them up if I'm there and put them back up on the screen. But if they would be unable to crawl up on something so their wings hang down, their wings would dry and harden in a crumpled position, and then they would never be able to fly. And that happens to some of them. You saw that fat little body. They use the liquid in the body to pump up their wings. So they pump up the hind wings first, then their forewings. And then they seem to rest for a couple of hours. And the rest of their senses finish developing. The wings get dry and hard. I keep track of how many monarchs that I raise each year. The first year I raised about 50, and the most I've raised is about 600. And I keep track of male and female numbers, and they're pretty close, 50-50. The male has very narrow veins, and he has 2 scent glands down here on his hind wings, 2 spots. Female's veins are a little bit wider, and she has no black spots on her hind wings. So when the wings are open, it's very easy to tell who's who. Okay, can you tell who's who? Okay, down this one, it's very easy to see the spots. You know, we got a male. And up here, it's a little bit harder to see, but that's a male also. And behind them is a female. I had been trying to get a picture of the mating pair, because he will carry that female around for hours, going from plant to plant, but they weren't cooperating. I did manage to get a picture later, which you'll see in a little while. Okay, so they are drying off and hardening off, and they're on the porch, and they're in a container, and one would think there are no predators. Nothing can hurt them now. However, not with my cat Frisbee several years ago when I was trying to get a picture of that male in the aquarium. She showed up on the outside. Well, Frisbee went to cat heaven, and now they're very interested. So I had to make wooden covers for all of my aquariums and put heavy screening on the back, no holes in it. So they can get up on top and they can look, but they can't touch. The monarchs have little claws at the end of their feet for grasping and holding while they're climbing. It's also the mechanism that they use to taste with. So a monarch can land on a leaf and drum its feet on the leaf, and you can tell if it's a milkweed plant or a plant that would not be desirable for her to lay her eggs. As I said, they eat with their proboscis, and then here's this guy unrolling his, getting ready for a snack on that Joe pie leaf. Sometimes I have to keep the monarchs for a couple days. If there's bad weather, I can't let them out in the rain. And so after 48 hours, they will need some food. For about 2 days, they don't eat. And so I can make sugar water and put it on a sponge like I did here. Or I could give them fruit like a melon or a mashed up banana, something that they can soak up the nourishment from. However, sometimes there will be some monarchs who, like, they don't recognize it as a food source. So then they won't unroll their proboscis. So I take a little tiny, a straight pin and just gently unroll that proboscis so that it touches the food source. And then it's like, oh yeah, this is good. Sometimes I will put them out in this net container to finish drying off before I release them. I usually wait 24 hours before I don't release them the same day. But eventually you have to let them all go. And this is the time when the kids, neighborhood kids, love to help. They love to release the butterflies, and they're over every day checking out the caterpillars. What they say is, can we play with the monarchs? Not exactly. It's also a good time to take pictures because they are very docile. That little gal there was one of my best butterfly helpers and learners this past year. The summer butterflies that we get up here in Wisconsin during June and July, they only live a few weeks. They mate, they lay eggs, they die, and then their life cycle is over. It's the late August ones that will live 8 or 9 months, who will go to Mexico, spend the winter, and start back. There's my mating pair. So in here, depending on when they get up here in spring, we will get 2, possibly 3 generations. So about the middle of August, they start getting shorter, sun angle changes, and they start moving out of Canada, and they start making their way down south. And they will get down here in early November. So it's gonna take them a couple months to make that trip. And as I said, some go to Florida and stay there. West of the Rockies, they go to the coast. And these are the monarchs that we will peg. Monarch Watch program from University of Kansas, which was started by Dr. Chip Taylor back in the 90s. They have come up with a tag that you can put on these late August monarchs. And it has the Monarch Watch telephone number, if you find it, and also the monarch, individual monarch's number. And you can call it in and report it. There's very lightweight propylene, and at the end of the season, probably in March, after the monarchs have left Mexico and started back to the U.S., volunteers from Monarch Watch will go down to Mexico and they will meet with the locals who have gone up into the sanctuaries, climbed the mountains, and have hunted through millions and millions of dead butterflies on the forest floor and found some tags. They don't find a whole lot, but they do find some. And then they hang on to them, and when the Monarch Watch people come, they will redeem them. They pay them 50 pesos for each tag, which helps some of those people supplement their income. And then all this information is entered into the Monarch Watch database, and it helps the scientists study their migration patterns. Sometimes it tells them the speed, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of other things they're studying that I really don't know about. But I can go online, look at their database, and see if any of my monarchs were found in Mexico or found along the way. And I think people are pretty good at reporting if they do find it. And some people that I read about have had a number of them found in Mexico. And I live in the southern part of Milwaukee County, and I had one that was reported on the database found like in the next county south. So someone spotted it. I don't know if it was dead or alive, but got that far. So I don't know. Sometimes they refer to this generation of monarchs as the Methuselah generation. They live the longest, and they are the toughest, because they're going to fly over 2,500 miles, some of them. They're flying to a place they have never been. It was their great-great-grandparents that were there. And they're going to do it with just the GPS components that they have in their body. There's a component in their brain and in their antenna, and that coordinates with the sun and with the magnetic compass in the earth, and they find their way there. They go to the same places in Mexico every year, and sometimes to the same trees they will occupy. And this little guy is nectaring up. In fall, we know that the asters are out, and they're going to need nectar all the way down to Mexico. Fuel for the journey and fuel for the winter, because during the winter they do not eat. They will drink water because they need the water to change the lipids in their body to energy, but there's no food down there. So their whole metabolism slows down, and they're just kind of resting during the winter. So along the way, they're going to have lots of obstacles. You know, bad weather, traffic, people, predators. And this little guy, when he starts out, he weighs about a gram, like a paperclip. And he will weigh more when he gets to Mexico than when he left Wisconsin. But the food has to last all winter long. I'm just glad you're not on it. Okay, where do they go? They go to the mountains in Mexico, west of Mexico City. Perfect altitude for them. It's cool there. It's moist because you don't want their bodies to get dehydrated. If it were hot and sunny like Arizona, they would dry up right away. And the forest there where they congregate on the trees acts like a blanket and an umbrella to shelter them from the worst storms. And most of them get down there early November. And in Mexico, the the people celebrate this as a holiday. They have parades and festivals, they go to the cemeteries, they decorate the graves of their ancestors, and the monarchs are floating through town, and they regard these as the souls of their ancestors coming back to visit. So these monarchs will come in and they will stay for about 5 months. Now, we did not always know where they went in Mexico. And there were 2 Canadian scientists, Dr. Frederick Hart and his wife Nora, studied monarchs for 30, 40 years. And as they were getting up in years, they needed help. Because they had climbed a lot of mountains in Mexico, they had searched, they had never been able to find where they wintered. So they engaged some scientists, or they put an ad in the paper, and some citizen scientists helped them. One couple, named Catalina and Ken Gruber, were instrumental in finding the first location. Now, Ken Gruber has ties to Wisconsin. He was a native of Kenosha who relocated down in Mexico, met Catalina, who's in the picture there, and married her. And they were doing this searching. For about a year and a half, they climbed mountains and looked and talked to native people and so on. And one day in January 1975 is when they climbed a mountain and found millions of monarchs up there. And of course they notified the Urquharts, who were thrilled. And then the following year, National Geographic did that spread on them. But in that National Geographic article, he did not disclose exactly where this place was. And 2 young scientists who were monarch scientists, Dr. Lincoln Brower and Dr. Bill Calvert, asked him. This is Bill Calvert, who was one of the guides on the trip I took down there. But he would not tell them. So they checked the article, and they knew it was in the state of Michoacan and the elevation of the mountains. So they got out their maps and figured out it could only be about a dozen mountains. And so they began searching, and they mapped where all these monarchs congregate every year. And in 2012, there was an IMAX movie made called Flight of the Butterflies. You might have seen it. Played in Milwaukee one whole summer at the IMAX theater. So if you ever get a chance to see it, make sure you do. It's worth it. It tells the story of the monarch's migration as well as the Urquharts and the Grubers' discovery of it. It's a wonderful story. And this is Catalina, 38 years later, holding the original magazine. She was at the premiere when the movie opened in Austin, Texas, which is where she lives now. But these are the sanctuaries that get populated. There's Mexico City, and there's about a dozen of them that the monarchs come back to every year. I visited 2 of them, Sierra Chincua and El Rosario. In Sierra Chincua, you could ride your horse partway up, and you had to park your horse and walk the rest of the way. And along the way, this one is this is up on the top. We would get to the top and you would see the trees just covered with what looked like dead leaves. And when you got closer, you would see that they were all bunched together. They huddled together for protection and for warmth. And when the sun warms them enough, they can open their wings and flex their wings and stretch their muscles. So all winter long, they're not eating, they just drink. And the 2 biggest dangers down there are the birds that will come in, a predator. It's a type of oriole that they have down there. They'll come in and dive on the clusters of monarchs, and a whole bunch of them fall, so he can eat what he wants. And the ones that fall to the ground and can't climb back up, see, they can't fly unless it's at least 50 degrees. So if they're not able to fly up and they can't crawl back up, there are lots of little mice on the ground that will gladly eat them up. And their other big danger down there during the winter is bad storms. They can survive cold down to about 32, but not wet. If they get a wet storm and it drops below 32 degrees, that moisture will freeze on their wings and that kills them. And there have been some years that we've lost like 80% of the population down there through storms. This was the second sanctuary. This is a rosario. This was a larger one. And in this one, there were no horses. You walked all the way. A series of steps and then climb the path. And along the way, you'd see seeps of water coming across the path, and you'd see the monarchs drinking. And they don't drink in the middle of the water, they're on the edges, and they're just sucking up the moisture and the minerals from the mud there. And to be very careful where you step. And you couldn't wave your arms a lot either. We got to the top, they were just everywhere, on the grass and bushes, everywhere. And the rope that I'm sitting beside is as far, that's the edge of the path. You couldn't go in among the butterflies. Because they were just solid. They were just marching across the grass here, sucking up the moisture, perched in the trees, basking in the sun, and flying. I was down there the first week in March, so they were becoming very active. And so there was a lot of flying.
And what year were you down there?
2009.
Okay.
But there were quiet moments too. Living up to his name. About the middle of February, they come out of sexual dialogues. And they become sexually active, and they will go through several weeks of frantic mating. And notice the date there, February 14th. And then by the early March, they're starting north. And this is how they head up. That generation that lived in Mexico all the winter will start up, and they will get to Texas and this lower tier of states. They will lay their eggs and they will die. Then it takes a month for those eggs to become butterflies, and that next generation will travel more. So we get that next generation. West of the Rockies, they will fly inland. And on this map here, you can notice the corn belt. This is where most of the monarchs will be breeding.
So how do the babies have any clue of where to go?
Don't you just wonder? And they follow the milkweed. And there must be some instinct that tells them that they should go northeast, you know, because that's where they go. They go up this far, and then there's a big push, and they will head up this way. And when they're coming down in the fall, they're coming down from Canada, and there are places around Lake Erie where they cross the lake. So they can fly quite a distance over the lake. It's just amazing. I just recently got this picture. This was taken this spring in Texas by this fellow, Chuck Patterson. And the milkweed is just out of the ground in Texas. And here is a female monarch who lives through the winter. Look how faded and tattered she is. but she's laying her eggs. You can see her abdomen is curled under the leaf. And so she's depositing that egg on the underside of the leaf. So they can look worn out, and sometimes they can be missing part of their wings, but boy, they're going to lay those eggs. Monarch Watch keeps track of what's going on in sanctuaries in Mexico. And you can see that there's a steady decline as the years have gone by since they kept track since the early 90s. And they measure, they don't count every butterfly, but they measure area down there. They do it with hectares, not acres. And if you look at last year was just terrible in the winter. It's the worst ever. And this year, this is just this past winter, there's a slight increase. But last year's monarchs, if you took all the trees that had monarchs on them, put them all in one spot, it would only take up about 1 football field. So we're down from billions, in good years, just down to millions now. So there's been a big decline. They also looked this year at where they were, and they don't always go to fill up every single sanctuary. It's different every year. And this year, 50% of them were in El Rosario. So that was a big population. And I looked at that, I thought, oh, I hope there would not be a bad storm at the end of winter here and wipe out that one section. So we know that they are declining, and we know a lot of the reasons for it. The biggest reason is loss of habitat. They need the milkweed. In Mexico, the problems are a little bit different. Now, there the mountains are being degraded mostly by the illegal logging. You can see all the areas that have been clear cut, and that lowers the temperature in the forest. And monarchs can only survive down to a certain temperature. Well, if you have very few trees and the temperature is lower, they aren't going to be able to survive. Climate change is another one that is affecting a lot of our animals all over the country. Higher temperatures are stressing the fir trees, and they are dying. So they get the extreme highs and the extreme lows. And then we mentioned the winter storms that can kill off the monarchs. And it seems like everywhere, storms are getting worse than they used to be. They're just like catastrophes. Then the other problem down there can be high impact tourism. If they want tourists to come, they want people to see the monarchs, but they have to regulate it so that sanctuaries don't become degraded. There are efforts to reforest the areas. This was a nursery we visited when we were down there, so they're planting trees. And these are the people that depend on the monarchs. This is the woman who cooked our lunch up in one of the sanctuaries. A gentleman who made beautiful baskets from the pine needles that they collect in the forest. Plus all the other usual tourist trinkets that we buy when we go visiting. These people depend on the tourists coming down, so they want to protect their land or forests. In the U.S., the problems are different. We lose a tremendous amount of land every day, 6,000 acres, just because of our development. Our cities, our shopping centers, our subdivisions, our roads, all of that takes up the habitat that used to belong to monarchs and to all the pollinators. And you'd think that one place that would still have milkweed would be the cornfields, the Midwest Corn Belt. Well, that's not true anymore. We have lost the milkweed there. Some say more than 90%. And the reason is the farmers now all buy the tonight, the genetically modified seeds. And then they can plant the corn or the soybeans, and then they come back and they spray it all with Roundup, which kills everything else in the field except the corn. And so milkweed is gone. And then in 2007, we got the ethanol mandate. So even marginal lands are being put into corn production by the farmers. And we've lost 24 million acres of marginal land. And that's the size of the state of Illinois. That's a lot of land. And then we also need to look at what do we do on our roadsides. We mow a lot, and we spray a lot. So the habitat losses in the U.S. are different from Mexico, but both are problem areas. And if you look at this map, here's our corn belt, and the red there is the glyphosate use. That's the Roundup. So all these farm fields have been sprayed, and you think, well, where can milkweed grow it? There's not much left. And this is their summer breeding grounds. Here in the spring breeding ground, there's quite as much glyphosate use. So what's the answer? Well, Dr. Chip Taylor from Monarch Watch has been a crusader for monarchs for years. And he is saying we've got to restore the habitat. And what I'm saying tonight applies to monarchs, but also to all the pollinators. So his goal is establish way stations between Mexico and Canada. His goal is 10,000 way stations, which would involve the host plants, whatever milkweed is native to that area. Up here, we would not plant the milkweed that prospers in Texas. Plant the native stuff up here. And also the nectar plants. And those are the two things that the monarchs need. Milkweed and something to eat for the adults. And this is how one of my butterfly gardens in the front yard looks. So at the end of this year, there were over 9,000 registered way stations with Monarch Watch. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's a start. And there's a growing awareness among people that we need to plant what's necessary or we're going to lose the migration. We won't lose monarchs, because there'll always be some around, but we will lose the migration. And where can we put these? Well, started out by putting them in yards, but there are lots of public places that that can also have a butterfly garden. And the latest push is to use our roadsides. We have thousands of miles of roads, freeways, and railroad right-of-ways, and the utility right-of-ways where there's nothing worthwhile growing there other than grass and whatnot. And if those could be planted with native plants and milkweed, we would have more of like a freeway, like a path for the monarchs to follow. In everybody's yard, that's kind of patchwork, but a roadway would give them a nice uninterrupted stretch. And this is what it can look like. Now Iowa is starting to get on the bandwagon, and they have mandated that native plants be in their seed mix that they plant along the roadsides. And so if you look at this, you see all the nectar plants, and I don't know if there's milkweed, I don't see any right there, but if there would be milkweed in that mix, that would be perfect for the monarchs and the other pollinators. And great for ground nesting birds. And the birds would come and find their lunch there too. Those caterpillars. Because if you plant it, they're going to come. That's my front yard. Some helpful websites if you want to read more about monarchs. Monarch Watch. Journey North, which tracks migration of many animals, not just the monarchs. Monarch Joint Venture, which is a consortium of many organizations bent on preserving the monarch migration and are responsible for the handouts that I gave you tonight. Wild Ones, the native plant group, they helped in making those brochures also. And then Monarch Trail. Many people aren't from Milwaukee, but Monarch Trail is an area in Milwaukee, which was actually a suburb, that there was 185 acres, and it's right near the zoo interchange there in Milwaukee. And every year, monarchs would roost there in the fall. You could go there during the day and you'd see monarchs roosting, or pardon me, nectaring all over on the flowers and the native plants. At night, you'd see them in the trees, just hanging and roosting for the night. Well, UWM bought a bunch of acreage there. They torn down, they put up a lot of buildings, roads, and out of that 185 acres, there's like 10 acres left for the monarchs. And a lot of it has gotten ripped up in this construction process. But the Friends of the Monarch Trail, and Barb Agnew is one of the fierce advocates for that. She really has rallied the troops and preserved that area. We go out and we plant native plants and are trying to make it a good place for the monarchs. So we hope they keep coming there. Because there are places where the monarchs come every single year and you can count on it. And this is one of them. And we don't want to lose them. Oops, what happened?
I don't know.
I think it was a loose connection. I hit the cord. And I think that disturbed it. So I'll leave you with my final thought. Take them on out to lunch, plant some milkweed. Okay, any questions or comments? Yes.
Is your presentation available anywhere?
No,
Do you have
just,
any recorded?
no. You have to get me with it.
Questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. He said, is my presentation available anywhere? And I said, no, you gotta, I'm part of it. You gotta take me and the computer. Yes.
Well, one other place that I thought about, and I've actually seen some things, golf courses.
You are right. Golf courses are, some golf courses
Right.
have milkweed. If they've let the,
Yeah, you know,
rough
there's a lot of
areas
natural
be
areas
natural.
usually. Yeah,
I know.
lots of
And I have a running battle with a couple of golf courses that I golf, and I say, why are you spraying and killing all that
right,
stuff?
right.
Well, we want it to just be tall grass.
Oh,
Not pretty. Yeah, I know. But you're right. When I go golfing, that's one thing I do is I have to wait for a little bit. I'm over there looking. I find eggs and some people.
Drop some seeds.
Yeah, and some people in my group are helping me. They'll find some too. Yes.
You mentioned railroad corridors. That made me wonder if organizations like Rails to Trails might be listed or involved in some ways as they try to create bike paths out of old railroad grades.
You're right, the bike trails that are being created, yes, yes. That would be a wonderful combination to get whoever is responsible for that to.
Well, Rails to Trails is the name of the organization.
right.
Okay.
You know, and that's of course state, so good with that. But I think local organizations that are committed, many times because I do a lot of riding, you'll see they'll have signage for the next several miles. This will be somebody's area where they planted the natural, you know, the native plants and so
Yeah.
forth.
Right, it's gonna take a joint effort on a lot of people's part. And I think the awareness is starting to come, and people are becoming much more aware and concerned. So now they gotta do something about it. You can't just say, oh, I'm afraid they're all gonna disappear and that would be sad. Get out there and do something, plant something.
Well, that's a good point, and on this, on the railroad issue, there's a remediation project on Union Pacific Railroad property down in southwestern Nebraska, where because the environmental manager for UP Railroad got interested in the Monarch through the education, through the series, that the restoration is gonna involve planting native prairies with an emphasis on planting milkweed and encouraging the Monarch. So these education, you know, we all believe, but it's something when you get a corporate bigwig to care about something like this.
Exactly, yes.
And they got the money to pay for big restorations,
Yes, they do.
especially when they gotta spend money on it anyway, clean up a mess.
Well, yes, that's it. And you know, when you think of the Department of Transportation or whoever is responsible for planting our roadways, they have to put some seed in. Why can't they put the right seed in? Yes.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I saw a press release, has designated, what, 3 million? Can you enlighten us to what that will entail?
From what I have read, a lot of that 3 million is going into Texas and Oklahoma to put in the milkweeds that belong there. And they're working with local organizations that are already up and running, you know, and filtering the money through them to have them do things. And then there's a large component of that cash that is going to Kansas, I believe. But I haven't been real careful about all the specifics, but they have it all designated. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you address the problem of trying to get milkweed started in your yard and telling the deer and the bunny rabbits to stay away?
I know.
Do you have any good ideas?
I have no idea, other than plant a lot so that they have something new of. So I know mine will be up like just this much. It peaks up and those rabbits, they don't even eat it. They just break it off, run away. I know.
Okay, there's no answer.
I don't have a solution. I just plant a lot of it and figure they gotta eat food. And I don't have deer. Yes.
Vaguely, I have in my memory that monarch is one of the few insects or the only species that does this multiple generation. Is that true?
Yes.
In the world?
Well, that migrates, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
That
that's-
takes generations rather than just one,
Right, yeah, the same animal going back and forth, yes.
because there are other insects that migrate, the dragonflies, for instance, but they are the same ones, I think, that come back
Mm-hmm.
in the spring.
Yeah, and that's why it would be such a shame if we lost this.
For sure.
Yes. You,
Oh, yeah, just reading, fourth generation begins a long journey back to Mexico. Okay, recently made a donation to a group called the Natural Resources Defense Council, and they incorporate a couple of things that you were saying. For example, 20 years ago, the number of monarchs during the Weather Forest West Mexico City reached 1 billion. This year, just 33.5 million of butterflies over in Mexico. And then they were proposing some of the things that you're proposing, pulling pressure, and a couple other things as well. The Depression USA imposed new national limits on herbicide spraying, creating activity zones managed the fields, mobilize citizens, and foster a grassroots movement to plant a butterfly highway of milkweed along the Monarch's migratory route. And I think GMOs came out in the early 90s, and now something like 82% of cotton is GMO, more 85%, soybeans 93%, which basically means that they're structured to encourage the spreading of a large amount of the glyphosate, which is basically public enemy number one as far as not only the monarchs are concerned, but a number of insects, birds.
right,
Natural
exactly.
Resources
Yeah.
Defense Council. I only gave them 10. I gave maybe a few earlier, but it's just one of many organizations that's involved that actually have a large reach.
Mhm. Yeah, right. You know, and it's the big ag companies, Monsanto and Dow.
And Monsanto is
Yeah,
is
Dow.
number one.
you know, and even Monsanto said, well, we're gonna help, the butterfly, you know. But, you know, they make X amount of dollars and they're giving this. Yeah.
I was just wondering, how do you attach the tag on the wing? Is it glue or adhesive?
Oh, it's adhesive, like our postage stamps.
Oh,
And, it's very easy to put it on the wing. You touch it as little as possible. And I use a toothpick, you know, just have it stick to the very edge of the toothpick, put it on, and then you just hold it for a couple seconds and it's good to go. Yeah. Yes.
Does the fact that you paid those people down there to find the tags, did that encourage them to kill the live ones at all, to look
No.
at that?
Mm.
They don't.
No, they don't.
Yeah, that they would be like honeycombs, or like
Yeah.
honeycombs or something.
And it would be a very time-consuming effort. Monarch Watch did an experiment one time. They went down there and they gathered monarchs into a garbage bag. They filled the garbage bag with dead monarchs after the winter was over. And then they took a big tarp and they went through those butterflies one at a time, see how many tags they would find. And I forget the number of them. I'm not good at remembering numbers. But you know, how many would there be in a garbage bag? They found like 10. So that's not a lot.